and truth. We give our heart.
James here in a moment. We good? All right, we're live now at home. Thanks for being here. It's not a nice place out there, but it's warm in here, comfortable, and so thank you for coming and sharing in our Bible study this morning. And seems like an odd thing to say, but thanks for sitting up front. You're right here. It's like everybody's right here. That's rare. All you folks back, come on up here, but the rest of us. But anyway, it's good to see everybody this morning. We're in this study of the book of James. We introduced it Wednesday. We talked a lot about who James, I guess we might say who James could be, right? We don't necessarily know for sure who. With 100% certainty. I think there's a lot of evidence. We talked about all the evidence that kind of points to James, the brother of Jesus, as the author of the book. Again, without any kind of very specific statement being made by the author, it's kind of hard to know with 100% certainty. And we talked a lot about the possibilities. There are basically three James that potentially it could have been. One is most likely deceased by the time this is written, James of the 12. There's James the Less it could have also potentially have been, but again, we pointed more likely to the idea that it's James, the brother of Jesus. Maybe more importantly is, who's he write it to? How's he describe them? Yeah, to the 12 tribes that are scattered, right? He's talking to basically Jewish converts, right? Folks that had been in Judaism but have become believers in Jesus and quite possibly been part of that scattering even in the days of Stephen, when Stephen was stoned to death, and the scattering of those early believers happens out of Jerusalem. And so this letter is written in a much more broad sense. In other words, there's not one person he's sending this to. There's not one church he's sending this to per se. This is a broader, bigger picture kind of message. And because of that, I think you're going to find as you study through it that there's not like one central, well, there can be in some ways, but there's not necessarily just one threaded theme or one point he's trying to get across. He'll hit and miss. He'll talk about this, and then he'll remind them of that, and then he'll bring this subject up, and he covers a lot of ground in subject matters that may or may not necessarily all the time be interconnected with one another. We'll even see that a little bit in our study today. So right off the bat, what's the first thing that he challenges them to do? Find what? Find joy, right? And find joy when? Yeah, when you fall into trials and temptations for the purposes of God, when you're honoring Him, when you're serving the Lord, when you fall into the different trials and tribulations and challenges, it's okay, because you'll learn some things from it, you'll benefit some things from it, and ultimately, which is question 3 of our lesson sheets, who guides you through that? God does. I shared with you in the notes, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 6 through 10. There's a statement, I believe, in verse 9 of that context that said, what's the first 3 words of verse 9? If somebody's in that text, I guess I can pull it up too, if I'm remembering the correct. God is faithful. Okay, and hopefully, if you read through that text, you'll see that statement. Here's what's interesting. Author mistake. If you looked at that and wondered, where's Brian going with that, and you challenged my thinking, you might have actually realized there was a typo. Jump to 2 Corinthians chapter 1. There was something you could learn out of 1 Corinthians chapter 1. I actually meant to take you to 2 Corinthians chapter 1, didn't catch it. So I'm going to show it to you on the screen. Here's really the narrative I wanted you to look at. He said, and whether we be afflicted, it is for your consolation and salvation, which is effectual in the enduring of the same sufferings which we also suffer. Or whether we be comforted, it is for your consolation and salvation. Paul's here talking about challenge, right? Trial, difficulties, tribulations. Our hope of you is steadfast, knowing that as you are partakers of the suffering, so you also of the consolation. For we would not, brethren, have you ignorant of our trouble which came to us in Asia, that we were pressed out of measure, above strength, insomuch that we despaired even of life. But we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves. Here was where I was hoping to get to. But in God, which what? Raiseth the dead. I want you to pause on that thought just for a minute. I'm upset with myself that I didn't type the right number and get you to this text, because this was an important text. Why is it that we can trust God to help us through our trials? What's verse 9 tell us at the conclusion? If He can raise the dead, He can get me through my trials, right? That's an important aspect of understanding the ability God has to deliver me. Why? Count it all joy, Brian. Why? Because you have a God who can raise the dead. Be patient through those trials, Brian. Why? Because you have a God who can raise the dead. He has power over the one thing that none of us feel any control over, right? And if He can do that, then He can accomplish what's necessary to get me through whatever trial is there. Who delivered us from so great a death, and doth deliver, in whom we trust that He will yet deliver us. What God does for us is continual, in other words, right? Paul says He delivers and He delivers and He delivers. He continues to aid us. When you fall into various trials, James says, count it joy. Your God can lift you through that. Your God can carry you through that. And He's evidenced His ability through men like Paul, that even in the most challenging of times, even when death knocks, God is still there and still has power to aid and help through that kind of difficulty. So we generally get in trouble when we trust whom? When we trust ourselves. Our challenges generally come when we trust ourselves. I'm going to get myself through this. I'm going to fix this situation. I'm going to resolve whatever it is that's in front of me. And we become enamored with the idea that somehow there's a skill set or a knowledge base or something within me that's going to let me deliver me through this challenge, when really the only answer is to look to the God who has power even over death, right? Joy can return then, right? I stay disappointed and discouraged and hopeless and helpless, and as long as I'm trusting in self, that's how I'm going to feel, right? Because inevitably I'm going to what? I'm going to fail. Inevitably I'm going to fail. And when the failure comes, then what? If I'm just relying upon self and the failure comes, then what? Right? The hopelessness and that helpless feeling and all of that despair will just multiply. I'm going to put it at the feet of God. I'm going to put my joy in the hands of a God who said, Brian, if you'll be patient through the trials, you'll come out the other side. And what do we become? That's question 4. What do we become when we have that success and we come out the other side? Yeah, we're perfected, right? Go look at James chapter 1. Go back to the text and look at verse 4. But let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. Patience isn't always easy. Patience isn't always what I want in the moment, right? What I want in the moment often is immediate resolve. It's not always found. But we're perfected by this process, if you will, this period of time that allows for us to face trial, find success in trusting God, grow that faith in ways that builds a greater level of patience and perfection. In what ways do you think we become perfect then? What's James talking about? I'm perfected. Okay, our character becomes perfected. Okay? Our faith is being perfected through this process because the more we're trusting in God, the greater our faith is elevated, and we're keeping things in the right perspective because of that. What else do you think of? There's no right or wrong here necessarily.
Through your faith, you have need of nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You'll provide.
So what temptation comes when you feel like a need is not being met? Okay? The temptation might be that God isn't concerned about me.
You're not getting what you feel like you're needing. Sometimes you get the idea in your head that, well, then I just got to do it myself, and you start getting puffed up because you did it yourself.
Okay? So then we turn back to that self conversation that we had a little while ago.
If things don't turn out just the way we want to, a lot of people, they blame, first thing they do, blame God.
Right. And that's what we're trying to avoid in this process for sure. Are the temptations sometimes stronger to not just turn to self, but maybe when we see this need, I'm not looking to God, looking to self, and I convince myself that any means is okay, right? It's a need. I've convinced myself that's a need. I've got to have it, and by any means necessary, I begin to pursue it, and I become impatient. I try to cheat or find shortcuts, maybe use levels of dishonesty, whatever it takes, right? Because I'm convinced that the need in front of me is the most important thing. And I'm going to get that whatever it takes. So if I'm finding joy, if I look at the trial, and I'm just wrapping all this together, I'm finding joy in the midst of the trial. The joy that's coming from God, getting me through the trial, is helping me not get impatient. It's helping me not pursue selfish ambitions to resolve the challenges. And all the while, I'm being perfected and recognize that I don't want. It reminds me that when I think of want, my mind always goes to Psalm 23, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I don't lack anything when I've got God. I don't lack anything. And that seems strange to say, but it's true. Of the things that are needful, I lack nothing. So why feel helpless and hopeless and discouraged and impatient and all of those negative character traits if I can just focus on the fact that when I've got God, I lack nothing. And that's an important part of this process. He turns that conversation. I'm sorry. Thoughts or questions? I should slow down a second. So the next question on your list, and by the way, your question sheets don't have the verses. That's my cheat to make sure I remember what verses each one's in as I'm looking at my screen. So you're going, hey, I didn't get that cheat. That's right. That's my cheat and not your cheat. But anyway, verse 5, what should we do if we lack the understanding necessary to overcome? Okay, so I'm being perfected, finding the joy in the trials, patient through the process, growing in my faith with God. And if I feel like I'm lacking something, where am I going to turn to? I'm going to ask God for it, right? I'm going to turn to God for that. Again, sometimes when we feel like we're missing out on something or we're lacking something, we turn back to self and we exacerbate our problems more and we create greater difficulties. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask. Let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. That's a challenging text. And because we might get the impression here that if I want to know something, I'll just ask and God will just talk to me and tell me, right? And just, right? And the challenge with that is Scripture seems to bear out that there's a different methodology that God uses to communicate to us, right? God, in times past, through sundry times, diverse manners, in Hebrews chapter 11, or Hebrews chapter 1, spoke unto us through the prophets, but in these last days spoke to us through His Son, right? There's a method, there's a process by which God communicates to man, and God's not going to tell me something other than what's already been provided, okay? So what's the point, Brian? My point is, don't overreach what James is trying to say here. If you feel like you're lacking, right, that's the conversation. If you feel like you're lacking, if you're missing out on that sense that you want for nothing, and you're letting the trials and challenges and tribulations convince you that you need something beyond what you have presently, then reach out to God and ask for wisdom and guidance and help in understanding, and He'll provide that. It doesn't mean He's going to give me different knowledge than He's already provided within Scripture. It doesn't mean that He's going to say, oh, yeah, okay, Brian, you didn't like that text. Well, here's another one. Here's something different. You can live by this set of standards, and that's not James's work here. But he is trying to encourage us that if you don't understand something, don't just write it off, or don't just stay in that despair. Pray about it, right? Pray about it. God may be able to open your heart, your mind in ways that doesn't take miraculous conversations. It doesn't take giving us more than what the Scripture already provides. It doesn't necessitate any of that. God, through His ability, can maybe open our eyes and our hearts to the wisdom that He's providing, and He doesn't withhold that. If men need that and they lack that and they're seeking that from Him, He gives it in what way? Liberally, right? I think that was the next question 6. In what quantity? He gives it liberally. The wisdom of God abounds to those who will seek it. Again, all of this is pointing to the idea that that's where our faith should be leading us. Our faith should be leading us to look to God. When you're in trial, look to God. When you feel the challenges of tribulation, look to God. When you don't understand what in the world's going on in front of you, ask. And He can enlighten and open our hearts and our minds with the wisdom that He provides for us. Go ahead, John.
The same type of concept that Christ Himself had His followers whenever He was cautioning them against being overly consumed and concerned about the needs of this world. And what's the very next thing He says? Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. That's what James is referring to here.
Yeah.
Having that godly mindset, seeking Him, seeking His kingdom, His righteousness, that in and of itself is seeking out His wisdom as well.
Yeah.
That's where we tie into here in this verse of having faith that doesn't waver, that opens up our minds to what God is trying to tell us.
Sure. And when we become focused on really wanting to simply appreciate what the righteousness of God is, then we will open our hearts and our minds, because I want to make that connectivity to what God is offering. And I think I appreciate your point too, that God needs to be the first place we look for these things. He's not the last resort because I've done everything on my own and it's all failed in front of me. No, God needs to be the first place that I seek assistance, help, wisdom, strength, guidance from. And that's, I think, part of this conversation as well.
And our role in that is to be receptive of the things
Yeah.
that we
Yeah,
learn from studying.
don't ask for the wisdom of God to be given liberally with a heart that doesn't want to receive it, which is actually kind of what he says here in a moment. But you're right. Our responsibility here is to be open and receptive to that which God is providing. Go ahead, Jim.
I'm afraid we ask, when we do ask, we want answers now. We don't have the patience to wait.
Well, and think about how this thought process of James kind of flows together then, right? Let's work on the patience by finding joy in trial instead of despair. Because that patience is being perfected, now I'll wait on God. I'll ask for the wisdom necessary. I'll trust that he gives liberally, and I'll be patient because that's the process by which of the character I've built as it relates to that. So think about that then. Look at verse 6. So here's how somebody's got to approach God. Let him ask first how. In faith, nothing wavering. And what's he mean by that? Okay, no doubts. It's a fair description. Just giving you a second to think about it. Okay, with assurance. You think about the idea that we can't ask God from a mindset, well, God, if you happen to know, right? If you can answer, no, we don't approach God as if he was limited, right? I asked in faith because I have confidence he can provide the wisdom necessary to guide me through this. It's a matter of trust. It's a matter of confidence. It's a matter of removing the doubts. And it's a matter of being prepared, back to a thought a moment ago, to receive whatever the answer is that God gives. I have faith in whatever the answer God provides is. And I'm going to trust in that.
If's a big word.
Yeah, it creates a lot of problems, doesn't it? Yeah.
Even Job said, even if he slain me, still I'll trust him.
Yeah.
And
And that's the level of faith we need to be achieving, right, or striving for. Yeah, and that's amazing, actually, when you think about it. That even when the result seems to be negative, God's still the best option always.
The imagery here harkens back to how Peter had learned this lesson.
Yeah.
You can't have 1 foot on the water, 1 foot in it.
Yeah.
You have faith that what Jesus was commanding him to do, he was able to do. And when he doubted, when he had that lack of faith, is when he began to sin.
Yeah.
It's the same type of idea here. We've got to be able to have our faith firmly fixed, knowing that no matter what the answer is, no matter when it comes, it is the way to go.
Right. And I think you're right. I think you get this secondary thought where he says, "For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea driven with the wind and tossed." Our faith needs to be consistent. We want to make our own choices and live our own way and do our own thing when we feel like everything's fine. Then we hit the valley, and now I want to reach out in faith to God, and then maybe things correct themselves a little bit, and now I'm not. God says, "No, I don't want that man to approach me, who comes to me when it's convenient, and when it's not convenient, he doesn't. When it's convenient, he does, and when it's not, I don't want somebody that's wavering like the waves of the sea." In fact, he's pretty bold in verse 7, isn't he? What's he say? That guy's what? That man is not. That man shouldn't think that he will receive anything of the Lord. God's looking for consistency. What kind of man is he described as in verse 8? Okay, so he's a double-minded man, and unstable in his ways. And we've already answered part of question 9. What should a double-minded man expect? So in what ways does he become unstable? That's what I really wanted you to think about. Okay, so the description in the text is in everything, right? In all. get with the Lord or don't. And that sounds like a strange way to say that, but that seems to be the imagery here. Right? God's not looking for perfect people within themselves. He's not looking for the self-righteous. He's not looking for those who believe they've perfected themselves in their own doings. That's not who He's looking for. What He's looking for is the man who will consistently walk his faith and find joy in his relationship with God, even through trial, even through troubles, even through tribulation, and he's trustworthy in that sense, in that relationship. And the concern is that someone who tries to walk with one foot with God and one foot somewhere else, it's not very stabilizing. I walked up to the building yesterday, and normally that walk is very simple. Not yesterday, right? My normal stride became 3 inches as I was trying to make sure. Now, when I was 25, by the way, I didn't care if I'd just go. But at 55, and you're walking across that, you're a little more nervous, right? That ground below you doesn't seem nearly as comforting. And so you're cautious, right?
I'm going to add just a little.
Sure.
In chapter 4, but I really like this verse. And draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded.
Yeah, he goes back to that theme later. And
That's a little ahead.
no, you're fine. And that instability comes with self, and God's the stabilizer. And sometimes we don't see it, or at least we're not honest about it. Why do I feel unstable? Why do I feel like I'm not standing on? Well, most likely it's because I'm trusting in something other than Him, and have become that. And I haven't drawn nigh to Him as I should.
Doesn't this also bring to mind about how we are supposed to be like a little child? A little child doesn't worry about a roof over their head, heat in the winter, food on the table. They trust their parents for everything. And they don't worry about where it's coming from or when it's going to get there. Doesn't this kind of come back to that, about that trust?
And certainly that kind of trust is there in this conversation. And again, that instability that God's wanting us to avoid. And becoming unstable creates a disconnect between ourselves and our God.
I think a lot of times this can happen because you expect that if you look to God that He's going to take this storm away from you. But when you realize that that's not necessarily the case, but that with God He will get you through the storms, then you...
Yeah. That is a crucial, what's the word I'm looking for, but it's a crucial moment in all of our walks of faith when we realize that God isn't promising to remove the trials. He's promising that if you remain faithful, He'll get you through the trial. And I think a lot of people do struggle because they assumed that if I believed in God enough, that I wouldn't have the trial at all. And that patience that's being perfected in us, that's part of that. And the instability comes when I had false assumptions about what I thought God should have done, and now I'm unstable because I assumed He would do X, Y, and Z, and which He never promised to do. And now I'm faltering in my faith because of it. It happens. It absolutely happens.
You can't depend on a double-minded man.
Right. He's unstable in all of everything, right? And that's an important aspect of this as well. He's got his relationship with God's not very trustworthy, but he won't be you won't have much confidence in Him in other areas as well when it comes to that.
From the very beginning of this chapter, he tells us when the suffer trials and
Absolutely. Let me add Revelation 3 to the conversation. Maybe. Well, I guess I didn't. I thought I put that there. Revelation chapter 3. And I want you to think for a minute, and I ask this question: what other man could the double-minded man be compared to? It's poorly written, but hopefully you'll understand what I was driving at here when you look at verses 15 and 16 of Revelation 3. He says, I know thy works, that thou art neither cold nor hot. I would thou wert cold or hot. So then, because thou art lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. The double-minded man who wants to live one foot with God and one foot somewhere else. He wants the relationship with God and the benefits that it brings, but he doesn't want the commitment level that it takes to be the person of faith that he needs to be. This is interesting conversation, right? He said, I wish you were one or the other. And sometimes you might think, well, does he mean either get with me or get away, right? But cold water, I think the implication here is cold water can have its benefits. Hot water can have its benefits. But lukewarm water in the middle doesn't have the benefit that either one of those can bring. And so he says, I wish you weren't lukewarm. And because you are, there's no benefit. I spew thee out of my mouth. It doesn't help, right? Think about it. Ice cold cup of water, right? And I always used to use the coffee analogy. Ice cold cup of water, wonderful and refreshing. Nice hot cup of coffee, wonderful, refreshing, and then the world went upside down and they started making coffee cold, which is silly. But anyway, so now I got to think a whole other illustration. But my point is, God says, find a useful connection to me, right? Make your faith and your convictions and your relationship with me functional and useful. Because if not, you'll be just like this double-minded man. You'll become a lukewarm individual. You'll not be committed or convicted about anything, and it makes you unstable, and it just continues to perpetuate greater and greater difficulties. James is challenging us to walk a life of faith and commitment to God. When you don't know, ask. When you need help, ask. When you're striving to make sense out of things, ask. And God, who gives wisdom, will do that liberally. He'll open hearts and minds of men. I have always believed that, by the way, that if a heart is good and honest, what needs to be planted in that heart, God will find a way to plant. Isn't that really the parable of the sower? When he talks about the seed falling on all kinds of different grounds, but some of that seed fell on a good and honest heart. I believe every good and honest heart in the world can find the seed of God and let it begin to germinate and grow. Because that's the way it works. And if I'll open my heart and my mind and my thought processes up to God in the right ways, He'll help, strengthen, guide, encourage me. But don't think that any of this is going to work. Your faith won't be perfected. Your joy won't be found. The trials will still hurt. They won't have any help. There won't be any answer, right? The double-minded man can't think that God will be able to lead him. And here's the point I want to make before we close. The problem isn't God, right? The problem when it comes to this situation where somebody feels like, well, there's nothing here for me. The problem isn't God. The problem is us. We're the problem. And everything necessary to build the kind of faith and determination and stability in our relationship with God is provided if we'll look to it. And it's important for us to do that. Any thoughts or questions left over as bell just rang? So Lord willing, then Wednesday, we'll come back because he changes. Here's one of those moments where I told you where he just kind of flips a switch and maybe turns the conversation to a different kind of theme. That's going to happen a little bit in verse 9 as he encourages a different